Subtle popping? That's how you know the engine's on, duh. What kind of an idiot tries to drive a backfiring truck 160 miles in a monsoon to get parts to rebuild said truck? Okay, so I finally found an engine. It is in Rancho Cucamonga, which is about 80 miles away from where I live. We're gonna try to take the truck there today. Looks like rain. Remember, the truck doesn't have windshield wipers, but it does have new tires, so my next video might be me getting stranded 50 miles from home. But I think I only have to make it there, and then AAA can take us home, so wish me luck. Well, that's gonna be an expensive day. To the truck's credit, we made it to Rancho. Well, sort of. We made it to San Dimas, about 12 miles from where the new engine was. We tried to limp the last 12 miles, but there was just no way. I totally forgot that the 210 is a literal mountain pass. Getting passed on the 10 because you're going slow is funny. Getting almost run off the road by a semi because you're doing 15 on an interstate looking for a breakdown lane is terrifying enough to forget to capture any footage. Do I have a GoPro? Yes. Did I bring it? Yes. Did I use it? What do you think? Anyway, I'm not sure if we spun a bearing or what, but yeah, now we really need a new engine. The tow, the Uber, and the preceding rental truck ended up costing about what the engine did itself. Sad. It started raining again as soon as the engine blew up, like a funeral in a movie. And after all that, the rain was so bad on the way home that we probably would have died anyway in that death trap. And when you put it that way, it's probably good we broke down. Anyway, the next day we grabbed a truck from LAX and cruised our way there. Good wipers on that truck. Actually, really nice everything, really. Maybe I should get a car that's not a piece of junk. Speaking of junk, the new engine made it about 20 feet before our next major hurdle. The guy's engine hoist broke. He raw dogged a quart of oil in it though, and soon we were well on our way. Please, for goodness sake. Jesus Christ, you could hang out the window too if you want. He's a good friend, but his videography style is at best found footage from a horror movie. What am I supposed to do with this? Getting the engine out took a little planning. We actually had to make a pit stop to buy a lifting bracket first because my plan to distract the previous owner into leaving his on the engine did not work. Then we had to figure out how to finagle the tailgate with the engine suspended. We ended up driving the truck out from underneath it. And I don't know where I learned this, but an old tire makes the perfect engine cradle. But obviously I bought the finest engine stand that Harbor Freight offers. Side note, what else can you use an engine hoist for? For two reasons. It was not cheap, so I'd like to use it more than exactly 3 times in its life. And also, it's an incredibly powerful feeling to be able to lift 2 tons with a couple of cranks, so I'd really like to continue chasing that high. The guy I bought this from was a pretty experienced mechanic, and he said the engine was in okay shape. He was just doing a full car restoration with a new engine for a friend. Obviously he wanted to sell it, so I'm not sure he'd tell me if it was blown up on the inside. We're gonna find out, I guess. But we are Facebook friends now, and I know his address, so maybe he can be trusted. I borescoped the cylinders before I bought it, and they look fine. They're a little crusty in spots, but you can still see cross-hatching on the cylinder walls. Big scratches would be bad, and smooth spots would be from excessive wear. A light, even cross-hatching pattern is for oil retention, and I'm not sure these need to be surfaced at all. So what kind of engine did we end up getting? If we consult our handy decoder ring, T is Tonawanda, New York, just like the 305. Its birthday is September 20th, and HS is a 1969 350. AFX means it came from a Chevelle, Camaro, or a Nova, so not technically numbers matching, but close enough for me. I'm 90% sure the car and truck engines are the exact same, besides accessories, and I'm 100% sure a commenter will correct me if I'm wrong about that, but who cares? Remember the pile of garbage it's replacing? We're good. Our first goal is to tear down the engine and inspect it as we go. My mom asked me if I know how to do any of this, and no, I do not, but I am armed with hours of watching YouTube, plus an array of service manuals, and about 25 years of posts I can reference on the Chevy forums. We're basically looking for carbon buildup, gunk, metal chunks, or cracks in order of scariness. Small blocks are highly rebuildable, so even if we find a blown connecting rod or a spun bearing, we'll be okay, just out more money. And I'm kind of in as deep as I expected to be already. The ideal situation is that we strip it down, we find no wear, and we can just rebuild with new bearings and gaskets. A rebuild kit for that is about $200. If we have to get new pistons, that's another $100. If we have to machine the camshaft, the crankshaft, or the block, just keep adding hundreds. Popping the valve covers adds confidence. On my truck, these are always really gunky no matter how much I clean the inside. This engine looks really clean already. And chrome covers are cool, so hopefully these clean up well. I think they'll be a nice touch. I sprayed them with degreaser and took a first pass at scrubbing them. I don't plan on making an entire video of me cleaning things, but honestly that is all I have to look forward to on the to-do list for the foreseeable future. It is pretty satisfying to scrape off old gaskets though. I do have a lot of these to do, but you know what's less satisfying is wire brushing the crust out of coolant manifolds. I ended up alternating scraping, brushing, and vacuuming. I think maybe mice pooped on top of the intake. On the scale of smells, fuel and oil are great, coolant is weird, and mice poop is bad. Mix all three, let it ferment for a decade or two, and you have quite the concoction. The smart move probably would have been to check the compression first. If the engine is making identical compression from each cylinder and it's not leaking oil, that's probably success for my needs. But the engine didn't come with a starter, and if I stole the truck starter, this engine doesn't have a flywheel to hook it up to, so compression checking this engine would involve pulling the other engine to steal its flywheel. And while I have to pull the other engine eventually, that seemed like a mess to do all at once, and I think it'll be fun to tear down an engine to the block and rebuild it back up. That's how you really learn how to do it, Mom. And if we get it wrong, at least the second time will go a lot faster. Taking the intake off was going fine, at least at first. If you remember, I did this on the old engine, so Mom, it's one of the few steps I know how to do successfully already. However, this intake has 4 of the bolts in an impossible to reach cutout, and they're smaller than the other matching set, so I assumed they weren't structural, but the intake wasn't coming off. I figured that was because it was glued down, so let's get out the engine hoist. That confirmed that they are in fact structural, and I do in fact not know how to successfully do this part. 20 minutes of turning bolts 1/16 of a turn at a time, and it's off. Turns out this is an aftermarket intake, so it's aluminum, which makes it 3 times lighter than the stock one. I did not need the engine hoist for this, but it's kind of funny that I struggled through the heavier one by hand before, and now I'm using a 4,000 pound lift for the lighter one. Looking inside the lifter valley was also really encouraging. As we go lower, the likelihood of finding metal chunks or issues increases. Everything here looks pretty nominal. These long pins are called push rods. They move up and down to actuate the valves, which, if you remember, let air into the cylinders and then exhaust back out. At this point, I took my own advice and realized the best way to find issues is to start on the bottom and pull the oil pan. Here we are draining the oil and hoping to not find coolant or metal bits. Coolant would make the oil look like a milkshake, and that means you have a crack somewhere between the oil parts of your engine and the water parts of your engine. That's really bad. And metal would make it very glittery. This oil just looks like dirty oil. Hooray! Side note, I give myself a lot of credit, but it would be much more on brand of me to drop the oil pan assuming there was already no oil in it, and seeing how much oil came out, that would have been a very bad time. No gunk or metal in the oil filter either, but it's pretty hard to tell without cutting it in half, which I'm not going to do. We'll fast forward through me struggling through the oil pan itself. It was glued on pretty good, but some scraper action and carefully applied force worked like a charm. And no metal bits. Well, 2 metal bits. I don't know what these are, but let's hope it's from a prior incident that required a rebuild, and they were just terrible at cleaning the oil pan. So with the oil pan out, we can flip the engine over and check out the crank. Here I'm learning that engines are horribly offset in weight. Plus, turning the handle of the stand with oily gloves takes a difficult task up to the level of hernia-inducing. I also learned how much coolant stays inside the engine after the plumbing is disconnected. See, now that's very on brand. Great work. So, clean up that mess, flip the engine back over, and we can get to work on the top end again. And I lied earlier. The push rods don't actuate the valves directly. They actually push up on these rockers, which depress the valve springs to open the valves. It's a pretty complicated mechanical marvel, and I just wasn't in the mood to animate an explanation. Partially because this part of the process was new and scary, and I didn't get the right footage to explain, but I did get footage of me poking holes in this box because I thought it looked funny. Educational footage? Give me immature jokes all day. Those holes are to hold the push rods in order. Since everything wears in together, if I keep the same push rods, lifters, and rockers, I should put them back in the same positions I removed them. Just don't kick over that box by accident. Taking out the push rods is as easy as pulling all the nuts and carefully keeping everything in order. The head has some beefy bolts holding it down to the block. Turns out it is also heavy as heck and aligned by 2 big pins. I thought rotating the head to level would be easier, but again, oily gloves. The other head came off a lot easier. Like I said, I'm basically an expert after the first try. Note, it's a lot easier with the engine at a normal angle, and probably the easiest would have been to use the engine hoist, but we saved that for the light duty work. Taking off the head gives us a really good view of the top of the pistons, and they look pretty good. Pretty dirty, but they look fine. The cylinder walls still look great, very happy about that. And if you look, the pistons have 030 stamped on them. That means the engine was bored out at some point to 30 thou oversize. This supports my prayer that the metal chunks were because of a prior incident requiring a rebuild, or they mean this engine needs a third rebuild. But panning over the valves, they look pretty good too. Nothing obviously blown up yet. And these satisfyingly smooth cylinders are the lifters. They ride on the camshaft and push up on the push rods. I guess they're just held in by a precision bore, which is kind of cool because you can pull them out by hand by just overcoming a little suction from the oil. Fun and mildly stressful because you do not want to drop these. For now, I'll just line these up on the bench in order, but my 3D printing brain is itching to print a little case for them. Maybe later. A couple of the lifters needed some mechanical leverage to pull out, but they still look good. Just a little extra suction, I think. Another flip of the engine and we can start pulling pistons. Well, first let's take off the oil pump because it's in the way. This spins off the camshaft, and to be honest, I don't know if there's a right way to take this on and off. I just know that I've seen the other end of this long rod from the top. This is what the distributor attaches to and spins from that. There was some gunk inside the pump, but I think it's just like coagulated oil. And I did take one educational video actually. Here I'm manually turning the engine over. The big shaft is the crankshaft. It has offset lobes that the pistons attach to so that they spin out of phase with each other. It's kind of hard to tell from this side, but if we flip it over, you can see the pistons moving up and down. The crank connected to the camshaft mechanically times the movement of the pistons relative to the valves opening and closing, all with no electronics. This era is a mechanical engineer's dream. If you remember a couple videos ago, we talked about the power cycle and how the engine times a single cylinder. The crankshaft is what times all 8 cylinders relative to each other, which is pretty cool. Pulling the pistons was incredibly stressful, so stressful that I did not take any footage of the first 6 pistons. Everything is held on with high torque bolts, but you can't use a hammer or anything to help break things down because you might crack or mar an important mating surface. Once everything is detached, you can tap out the piston with a piece of wood, which is very satisfying. The first 2 pistons took me about 4 hours, and then the next 6 took about 90 minutes. I want to say I got better, but also maybe the penetrating oil just took that long to kick in, and I did use a hammer on some of them. I was really frustrated, but it's over. The pistons look fine. I did drop one, but I think I could just file off the ding since it's not on an important surface. With the pistons off, the crankshaft just floats on a skim layer of oil, and it's really fun to free spin. And maybe this is a better view. The pistons mount here, 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 and here. To get the crankshaft out, we have to pull the harmonic balancer off, which is basically just a big weight to damp the engine vibration. We used AutoZone's finest loaner tool, and I actually had it back to them in like 10 minutes. I think they were really confused to see me again that quickly. With that out of the way, we can pop the timing cover off. That's easy enough, but this was another professional glue job. The double chain is the timing chain. That's what keeps the crank and the camshafts rotating together. And the crankshaft has the heaviest torque values yet. These clamps hold it to the block with bearings in between. This all came out easy enough with a little muscle. Definitely a lot easier than the pistons. And so now the only thing left is the camshaft, which takes some careful rotation to pull it out cleanly. It sits on 4 bearings, so you just want to make sure that the lobes don't get stuck on their way out. It was at this point that I realized the fuel pump rod is still installed and is actually what the cam is stuck on. So that's a quick bracket removal and rod removal, and after like 10 hours, we are down to a bare block. So both the top and the bottom ends look awesome. We have a lot of cleaning to do, but I'm pretty happy with how everything looks otherwise. The downside is that means we probably didn't need to do any of this, but it'll be nice to have a clean engine inside and out, and a little bit of minimal refreshing for peace of mind is well worth it. If you wanted to watch an engine rebuild with pristine, brand new, shiny parts, well, you're almost certainly going to be disappointed. Honestly, you probably stopped watching a long time ago if that were true, but if you didn't, don't forget to subscribe. The goal is to get the engine rebuilt, back in the truck and back on the road in the next video. The plan is to just mildly refurbish the engine for minimal cost, like every other part of this truck rebuild. I thought about doing a performance cam, but the idea of picking parts that fit well together instead of using the ones that already match, especially when everything already looks pretty good, seems like a lot of work. We will need a carb and a distributor, although I wonder if the distributor I bought for the 305 will fit in this engine. I guess we'll find out. And hopefully that's it. Barring any major setbacks, I think we can do this pretty reasonably. I shouldn't have said that out loud.